Snow swept across the Wyoming plains, biting through every crack in the wooden barn. Inside, Jacob Turner stoked the dying embers of a lantern, trying to warm his hands after a long day feeding cattle. His life had grown quiet since his wife's death 2 winters ago, too quiet. The nights were colder not because of the wind, but because of the silence that followed him everywhere. He heard it then, a soft, broken sound. At first, he thought it was the wind crying through the boards, but when he listened again, it was different. It was human. A muffled sob, desperate and weak. Jacob grabbed his lantern and stepped toward the far corner, where hay was piled high against the wall. There, half buried under a worn blanket and trembling from head to toe, lay a young woman. Her lips were blue, her wedding dress torn and stained with mud. Jacob froze, disbelief flashing through his eyes. No one in their right mind would be out in this weather, especially not dressed like that. When he knelt beside her, she flinched as though she expected to be struck. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please, don't send me back." Jacob removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders without a word. The warmth of it brought faint color back to her cheeks, and he could finally see the tears frozen on her lashes. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly. But she only shook her head, her teeth chattering too hard to speak. Jacob didn't press. He lifted her gently, her body feather light in his arms, and carried her to the cabin. The storm howled behind him, but inside, he laid her by the fire, wrapping her in every blanket he could find. When she woke hours later, dawn painted the frost-covered window gold. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a second she looked terrified to be alive. Jacob poured her a cup of hot coffee, his voice calm but firm. "You're safe here. No one's coming for you tonight." She hesitated before speaking. "My name is Clara," she said, voice barely more than a breath. "I was supposed to be married yesterday, but he never came. They said I brought shame, that I wasn't worth the trouble." Jacob's jaw tightened. He'd seen cruelty before, but nothing cut deeper than rejection wrapped in tradition. For days, Clara barely spoke. She moved like someone afraid of her own shadow, always apologizing for taking up space. Jacob let her be, quietly leaving food by the hearth and repairing what needed fixing outside. But every night, he caught himself listening for her footsteps, as though her presence reminded him he wasn't as alone as he thought. One morning, she tried to leave. He found her at the door, her dress still damp from washing, her eyes full of confusion. "I can't stay here," she said. "People will talk." Jacob replied simply, "Let them. You nearly died out there. I'm not sending you back to freeze for their gossip." Something broke inside her at those words. She sank to her knees, crying not from fear this time, but from relief. Jacob knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Just start breathing again." Days turned into weeks. Clara began to hum softly as she worked, her voice growing steadier. She cleaned the cabin, cooked simple meals, and smiled shyly whenever Jacob thanked her. There was still pain in her eyes, but it softened when she looked at him. One evening, while fixing the barn door, Jacob asked, what really happened that night. She hesitated, then told him the truth. Her fiancé had left her at the altar, humiliated her in front of the entire town. Her family, ashamed, locked her out. She wandered for hours until she collapsed near his land. Jacob felt a storm build inside him, rage for what she'd endured and sorrow that anyone could treat her so carelessly. "You didn't deserve that," he said, his tone firm. Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But I'm still here." He admired that strength, the quiet kind that came from surviving rather than winning. The kind he'd lost after his own heartbreak. Something in her resilience started healing him, too. One night, the power went out during another snowstorm. Jacob lit candles, and they sat together near the fire. Clara's hair shimmered in the glow, and her laughter, soft and uncertain, filled the room for the first time. It was the most beautiful sound he'd heard in years. As days passed, Jacob's neighbors began whispering. Some said he'd lost his mind, sheltering a woman with no name, no ring, no past. Others claimed he'd fallen for her. When Clara overheard them, she tried once again to leave. But Jacob stopped her at the door, snow swirling between them. "You don't run because of them," he said quietly. "You stay because you want to." She looked up at him, tears glistening on her lashes. "And if I don't know what I want?" she whispered. He smiled sadly. "Then stay until you do." That night, she dreamed of warmth instead of cold, of hands that didn't hurt and a voice that didn't command. When she woke, she found Jacob asleep on the chair nearby, the fire still burning. For the first time, she felt safe enough to hope. Outside, spring was still far away, but inside that small cabin, something had already begun to thaw. Weeks passed, and the frost began to loosen its grip on the land. Clara had grown stronger, her cheeks carried color again, and her eyes held a new kind of calm. But she still wore her wedding ring, the one she'd never used. It wasn't a symbol of love anymore, but of a wound she couldn't forget. Jacob noticed her staring at it one morning. "You can take it off," he said gently. She hesitated, then twisted it free and placed it on the windowsill. "I thought it meant forever," she murmured. Turns out forever was just one cold night. Jacob didn't reply, he only set a mug of coffee beside her and went out to work, hiding the ache in his chest. As the days grew longer, something between them changed quietly. Clara began helping in the barn, brushing horses and laughing when the lambs nudged her for treats. Jacob found himself watching her more often, how she carried herself now, like she was learning to belong again. He didn't dare say it aloud, but she'd become the heart of his lonely home. One afternoon, a stranger rode up to the ranch. His fine coat and polished boots marked him as someone from town. When Clara saw him, the color drained from her face. "That's him," she whispered. Jacob's jaw clenched as the man approached with a smirk. Well, the stranger drawled. "Didn't think you'd crawl this far after what you pulled." Clara trembled, stepping back. "You left me there," she said, her voice shaking. "You told them I was nothing." The man laughed cruelly. "And I was right. No one wants a woman who shames her family." Jacob stepped forward, eyes cold as steel. "You'd best ride out," he said. "You're on my land now." The man sneered. "You think you can hide her? She's my fiancée." Jacob's hand tightened around the barn door. "No," he said. "She stopped being yours the moment you left her to die." Before the man could answer, Jacob slammed the door shut. "Leave," he growled, "or I'll make you." The stranger left, cursing under his breath. Clara stood frozen, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. Jacob turned to her, voice rough with emotion. "Someone needed to." That night, the silence between them was thick. Clara sat by the fire, staring at the flickering flames. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. Jacob hesitated. "Because no one helped me when I lost everything," he said. "I know what it feels like to be forgotten." Her eyes softened. "Your wife?" she asked. He nodded. "She died during the last winter. After that, I stopped living too, just breathing." Clara reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and placed it over his. "Maybe we both needed saving," she said. From that moment, something shifted. They worked together, laughed more, and the cabin filled with warmth instead of loneliness. One evening, as they planted the first seeds of spring, Clara smiled at him. "You gave me a new life," she said softly. "I just don't know how to thank you." Jacob looked at her, the setting sun catching her hair like gold. "Then don't," he said. "Just live it." Summer arrived, and wildflowers bloomed around the ranch. The whispers from town eventually died away. People moved on, but Clara and Jacob didn't need their approval, they had built something stronger. One morning, she surprised him with a small breakfast and a letter she'd written. "I was lost when you found me," it read. "But you never tried to fix me, you just let me heal." Jacob folded the letter carefully, his throat tight. He realized then that she wasn't just a guest anymore. She was home. That night, he found her standing under the stars, barefoot in the grass. "The barn still reminds me of that night," she said quietly. "But now, it's where I started living again." Jacob stepped closer. "Then maybe it's time to make a new memory there." They stood together in the doorway, the scent of hay and summer air wrapping around them. Jacob brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You deserve every bit of peace this world can offer," he whispered. "And if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my days proving it." Tears shimmered in Clara's eyes, but they weren't from pain this time. "You already have," she said. "You gave me a name again, a place where I'm not someone's mistake." Months later, the ranch was alive with laughter and light. Clara had opened a small flower garden near the barn, selling bouquets in town. People who once whispered now greeted her with respect. They said she glowed differently, as if sunlight had found her from within. Jacob watched her every day, still amazed that a woman who'd been left to die could bring life wherever she walked. And on a quiet autumn evening, as they stood by the fire, he took her hand and said, "This isn't about saving each other anymore. It's about building something new." Clara smiled through tears. "Then let's build forever," she whispered. Outside, the wind carried the scent of hay and home. Inside, two hearts that had once been broken found warmth that would never fade. And for the first time in years, the barn that once held silence now echoed with laughter, love, and the sound of a life reborn.